Hi, this is Paul, and I wanted to do a little bit of a video on um, Jordan Peterson was on Real Time with Bill Maher last night, and I've been a fan of Bill Maher for a lot of years. I was a very faithful watcher of his show, Politically Incorrect. What I really appreciated about Bill Maher was that he had a lot of honesty and a lot of opposing points of view, and he wasn't afraid to talk about it. And Bill Maher is rather famously anti-religious, which, hey, that's his thing. If you only watch people who agree with you, you make yourself weaker and you make yourself dumber. And so I really appreciate Bill Maher. I've always enjoyed him, and I know a lot of people might not like that I enjoy him, but hey, I do. So he had Jordan Peterson on last night, which was quite interesting, and he had him on with the governor of the state of Washington, that for our Canadian friends is on the American political spectrum, pretty as far to the left as you can get. Um, he had Alex Wagner, who I hadn't heard of her at all before, a CBS commentator, something like that, and Frank Bruni, who is a columnist at the New York Times. I read his columns semi regularly. He too is over to the left, and sometimes I get annoyed at his columns. Sometimes I like his columns. That's kind of the purpose of an opinion columnist. And so the discussion also had the lawyer for Stormy Daniels on and talked about that. And Bill Maher is Bill Maher. He does his shtick, and he does his comedy. And but then he had Jordan Peterson on, and he seemed to be a fan. He said he'd watched quite a few of his videos, which I found really interesting. Not totally surprising, because what tends to happen is we tend to see things on this political spectrum, and we tend to isolate things on that political spectrum, and people have way more layers than that. Bill Maher is kind of a libertarian, and has some of those traits that libertarians have, where they're over on different sides of the issue. He had a lot of things on the show about pot and 420, and his belief that pot should be legalized throughout the states. So it was an interesting show, and they had Jordan Peterson on. And the Jordan Peterson segment, for many Jordan Peterson fans, you'd hear a lot of the stuff you usually hear about Jordan Peterson. It was worth watching. I'm not going to play that segment. I'm going to play the overtime segment, because I thought there were some really interesting things in the overtime segment, and it was also curious to see how Peterson was going to be on that show. And because often when Peterson is dead on right in terms of hierarchies, and there's status, and status impacts conversations. And part of what made the Channel 4 interview so important was there was a lot of status going on in that conversation, and Peterson didn't back down. And in fact, Bill Maher led off the introduction to Peterson with a little bit of the Kathy Newman interview, which I thought was noteworthy too. But then Maher has kind of the regular show, which goes for an hour, and then he has an overtime segment, which goes right up on YouTube. Generally speaking, if you look on Bill Maher's YouTube channel, I'll put it in the notes. If you look on Bill Maher's YouTube channel, often bit by bit the show will come out, and so I'm sure you'll be able to see the Jordan Peterson segment, even if you don't have HBO. But the overtime segment I thought was very interesting. During the program, there was Alex Wagner, was that it? She kind of took on Peterson, which was interesting to watch. And Peterson was, as I would expect, he was civil and polite. Also, again, there's a lot of status in this room, and whereas if Peterson has his own stage, he is in that sense he's the top banana, or he's the guy in charge. In a room like this is Bill Maher's show, and Bill Maher keeps it his show. And so Bill Maher, that's who Bill Maher is, and that's his shtick. So as I did with, because this is a relatively short video, I'm going to play it through once, because I think most of you probably haven't seen it, and then I'll go back over it, and I'll jump in at some different points.
Okay, so First thing, before we get to the questions, you want to respond to what I just said about marijuana?
Well, as we talked about Starbucks, we talked about our great voter rights bill, we talked about our efforts to beat climate change, but for you, Bill, I can honestly say we got the best weed in the United States. It's a growing industry, and well-regulated.
It is well-regulated.
Well-regulated.
That's right.
By the way,
Humboldt County would give you a run for your money.
They are,
but
they're putting a little pressure on us. We've heard from the Attorney General in Seattle, actually, and we need to make sure that they back off. And wouldn't it be wonderful if the first time Donald Trump said something that was actually true, if he said he'd leave us alone on our marijuana decriminalization? Yeah, and I hope that will occur.
Well, yes, Jeff Sessions has said good people don't smoke marijuana.
Yeah, good.
So.
Thank you.
Not good people here. Okay, Michael, will you ever release the contents of the warning shot disc of evidence you tweeted about? Oh, yeah.
Possibly. It depends on how the case progresses. I mean, you know, we
What's on it?
Well... we took that picture and we tweeted it out, and it was exactly that. It was a warning shot to Michael Cohen, the president, that if they tried to claim that my client was a liar after 60 minutes, there was going to be consequences, and it worked. And it worked perfectly because we heard nothing from them. So we have the DVD, and we're going to release it when and if it's necessary, and we're going to see what happens with the case. But make no mistake about it, it's locked and loaded.
Can I ask a question about this?
Yes,
I mean,
please.
I've been listening to all of this about Trump and watching how this conversations go in the U.S. And I have one question about it. I mean, there's all these people in the U.S. who are on the conservative side who are aligned with Trump for all sorts of reasons. And there's all this tension around his presidency and attempts to pull him out of his office for various reasons. And like, what do you think will happen if that comes to pass? What do you think will happen to these people that have identified with Trump? And like, how is it that Democratic types, for example, are holding out their hand to say to these conservative types, sort of like, welcome back into the fold? Because it looks to me, from an outsider's perspective, that your country is polarizing in a way that's not good, and that, you know, people are going after Trump. And I understand that. It's not like I don't understand that, but there's all these people that elected him and that are identified with him, and they're not taking this well, you know. And so, well, they're not. It's not. And you know, you might not think they're very bright and all of that, and you know, they're backwards and all of those things. But you know, you need to have respect for the rest of your citizens, and if your country isn't going to pull itself apart. And I really see this happening from an outsider's perspective when I come down here. And I lived in the States for a while, and it wasn't like this before.
If he was just a regular Republican president with Republican policies, I would say you'd have a point. But what is so alarming is the assault on democratic norms, what we were talking about here today. Things like threatening to put people in jail, threatening to put journalists in jail, wanting military parades, praising dictators, wanting to be a dictator. I mean, we are at a moment here. I try to impress on the people who are too young to remember a lot of presidents and a lot of elections, how incredibly different this is than anything that ever came before. I never much liked the other Republicans who were in office, but I have a renewed respect for them. George Bush and Mitt Romney would not have tried to pull this shit. They just wouldn't.
What about Nixon?
Nixon got caught, and he gave himself up, basically.
Well, although this president makes the Watergate burglars look brilliant.
Right.
Well, but it seems to me that it's not...
point, we can be as tough as we're being on the president. I think we should, for all the reasons you just said, Bill, without telling his supporters that they're stupid, without saying basket of deplorables. If we want to bring them around to what I would say is a more enlightened kind of thinking, and if we want them to see Donald Trump as someone who's turned the presidency into one long infomercial for Mar-a-Lago, you know, we can do that without saying to them, you've been duped, you're chumps, you're dumb, you're deplorable. And I think we need to talk to them with more generosity than we do.
I'm confused about how this dovetails with your thesis that the left is too preoccupied with being non-confrontational. right?
The left is too
well,
preoccupied
just that
with
we
peace.
are.
That is
That's
definitely
interesting.
not
Okay,
Yeah,
no, all right.
No, that's
I'm
a good
paraphrasing,
question.
But the idea that liberals, especially intellectuals, are preoccupied with politically correct speech, that they're not.
I see what.
And yet.
No, they're too preoccupied with identity politics by a large margin, and they tend to categorize everyone by their ethnicity and their sex and their gender, and I think all that does is turn people into tribal actors, and that the end result of that is catastrophe.
But weren't you also saying, though, that the left is too worried about offending people?
I think that goes along with...
I will.
Yes,
Right.
yes. Well, that goes...
But then on the other hand, when the left, for example, offends people in the political sphere, you're questioning whether that's somehow bad for society writ large.
Well, I'm concerned about... I think that those two issues are somewhat separate. I'm concerned about the dialogue in the United States around the presidency pulling people farther and farther apart. It has nothing to do with the behavior of Trump. I think this is an independent issue. You can say positive or negative
But
things
he's
about
only
Trump
there
as
because
his
they
mind.
support him. You see,
I know.
mean, that's the thing. It's
but
not,
that's the issue. That's the issue. Is they did support him, and
without
so,
the circus, he's just a lonely clown.
yeah.
But he has these people in Congress who are enablers, and this base that it is a cult of personality, not unlike dictatorships we've seen in the past. I mean, he said once, famously, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any fans.
Yes.
And he has proved that to be almost true. I mean, we cannot imagine what he would do where they would turn on him, because I don't know what that would be. I don't think it's anything, because whatever it was, he would just say, well, it's fake news.
But okay, so imagine he's impeached, just for the sake of argument.
Impeach or convicted.
Okay, either of those. But it seems to me...
Well, that matters. One, he has to leave.
Yeah, no, it's not an unimportant detail, but it still seems to me that it leaves you with the problem of what do you do with the disaffected 40% that are going to be very unhappy about this, independent of Trump's behavior.
Kind of like the Sunnis after we kicked over Saddam.
Well, that's a hell of a precedent
ISIS.
to cite.
Yes,
right.
That's what I worry about.
Let me
Trump
suggest
support.
that this is an argument, looking for an argument rather than a solution. We're not waiting for impeachment. We're making sure that people understand Donald Trump cannot stop us today. Donald Trump could not stop me from the first net neutrality bill to make sure people have access to the internet. He could not stop us from doing that. He cannot stop us. He cannot stop us from acting on climate change with all this bloviating saying it's just a hoax. He can't stop us from fighting climate change. He can't stop us from having the best paid family leave and sick leave policy. He can't stop us. When we demonstrate people progress in our states.
Washington State.
No, but he certainly,
no one
That's an
can
absurd.
stop us from boosting
he
Washington
certainly is
State.
stopping us from protecting the environment. He has signed executive orders, right? The first thing he did in office was to sign an order that said, hey, you want to dump your coal sludge in the streams? Go right ahead. The head of the EPA is Scott Pruitt. He's reversed all of
No, he just changed it to the Environmental Pollutants.
I know, but to say he can't stop us.
And he's changed the tax landscape everywhere.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't do anything in your state.
And he's
he's
appointing crazy judges left and right.
So here's
he's
the good news.
changing things as we speak.
we're
We
not
don't cover it because of Stormy Daniels, but all of this is going on. What can I say? He's okay.
Get used to it.
Okay. All right. We didn't get to any questions, but it was a wonderful pass.
Okay, let's go back and rewatch it and I'll add some commentary.
First thing, before we get to the questions, you want to respond to what I just said about marijuana?
Well, as we talked about Starbucks, we talked about our great voter rights bill, we talked about our efforts to beat climate change, but for you, Bill, I can honestly say we got the best weed in the United States.
And this has been interesting. He's promoted his state, which is the job of a governor, but governors have a lot of jobs, and I don't know. I'd be interested to hear how some of you who live in the state of Washington feel about your governor, although that probably just falls out along party lines, which isn't terribly interesting to me, but...
It's a growing industry and well-regulated.
It is well-regulated.
Well-regulated.
That's right.
By the way,
Humboldt County would give you a run for your money.
They are,
but
they're putting a little pressure on us. We've heard from the
And I don't think he means Humboldt County. I think he means the federal government and Jeff Sessions.
Attorney General in Seattle, actually, and we need to make sure that they back off. And Wouldn't it be wonderful if the first time Donald Trump said something that was actually true, if he said he'd leave us alone on our marijuana decriminalization? Yeah, and I hope that will occur.
Well, yes, Jeff Sessions has said good people don't smoke marijuana.
Yeah, good.
So,
thank you.
a lot of not good people here. Okay, Michael, will you ever release the contents of the warning shot disc of evidence you tweeted about? Oh, yeah.
Possibly. It depends on how the case progresses. I mean, you know, we
What's on it?
well,
Nice move, Bill.
we took that picture and we tweeted it out, and it was exactly that. It was a warning shot to Michael Cohen, the president, that if they tried to claim that my client was a liar after 60 minutes, there was going to be consequences, and it worked. And it worked perfectly because we heard nothing from them. So we have the DVD, and we're going to release it when and if it's necessary, and we're going to see what happens with the case.
Smart lawyer.
But make no mistake about it, it's locked and loaded.
Can I ask a
Trump is like, why
outsider
can't I?
question?
And now Peterson's coming into the conversation. And again, I wondered if he was going to come in at all on pot, and partly because of his history of doing alcohol, you know, his work in alcoholism, his work in substance abuse. He mentions pot a little bit in 12 Rules for Life, but he hasn't really come out. And so, you know, he's being well socialized. This isn't his stage. This is Bill Maher's show. He's being polite, and I really wondered how long he was gonna, you know, when he was gonna come into this after segment. I've never watched one of these overtimes. I'm probably gonna keep watching them now, though. It's but he jumps in, and this, I guess, is a time for questions, and he's gonna come in with his questions. So, you know, I just played this before, so you've all seen it now once, but here we go.
Question about this?
Yes,
I mean, I've been
please.
listening to all of this about Trump and watching how this conversations go in the U.S. And I have one question about it. I mean, there's all these people in the U.S. who are on the conservative side who are aligned with Trump for all sorts of reasons. And there's all this tension around his presidency and attempts to pull him out of his office for various reasons. And what do you think will happen if that comes to pass? What do you think will happen to these people that have identified with Trump? And like, how is it that Democratic types, for example, are holding out their hand to say to these conservative types, sort of like, welcome back into the fold?
And, you know, if he's going to ask a question, I think that was about one of the best questions to ask, to interject, because in the food fight that is American politics right now, both sides are have lost perspective on the fact that this is one country. We have to live together. And, you know, even those who say consider themselves ardent humanists, well, you know what? Your political enemies are human beings. And, you know, from a humanist perspective, you have to learn to respect them. From a Christian perspective, you have to learn to love them. And so this question is tremendously germane, because what happens with polarization is that each side justifies their actions because of the behavior of the other. And so what happens in polarization is both sides both sides break the rules that are supposed to, the process, which again, as I've mentioned in other videos before, in a secular government, in a sense, you divinize a process. You make the process sacred. You always need, for human beings to have productive conflict, there needs to be something both sides hold in common. And so there must be a mutual goal. Maybe that's preventing civil war. But there must be something above both sides that both sides respect. And then that tension then holds it together. And so Peterson is saying, okay, hey, so let's say you impeach and convict Trump, which we'll get into in a second. You impeach and convict Trump. What's going to happen to that 40% of the people? That is, how come that question is not being asked on how many news shows, either on Fox or MSNBC? It's all the food fight about my enemies. How come this question is not being asked when we're talking identity politics, which we're going to get into a little bit? So if he's going to jump in, I'm glad he didn't jump in pot. Save your powder. Look for this question.
Because it looks to me, from an outsider's perspective, that your country is polarizing in a way that's not good, and that, you know, people are going after Trump, and I understand that. It's not like I don't understand that, but there's all these people that elected him and that are identified with him, and they're not taking this well, you know, and so, well, they're not. It's not, and, you know, you might not think they're very bright and all of that, and you know, they're backwards and all of those things, but you know, you need to have respect for the rest of your citizens, and if your country isn't going to pull itself apart. And I really see this happening from an outsider's perspective when I come down here. And I lived in the States for a while, and it wasn't like this before.
If he was just a regular Republican president with Republican policies, I would say you'd have a point.
Now, again, this is the process of polarization, where both sides justify more increasing extreme action and rhetoric on the basis of the other side. And if you've ever been in a relational conflict, a marital conflict, sit down with an unhappy couple sometime, and this is what you'll hear again and again, and it just keeps pushing it out. And it may very well be that the other side is violating the sacred norm that's supposed to hold the whole thing together. It may very well be that the other side is breaking rules and has ambitions. And so, okay, but be careful the justifications you produce.
But what is so alarming is the assault on democratic norms, what we were talking about here today.
Okay, and so that Trump is undermining the democratic institutions that we rely upon to be able to have productive conflict. And again, I think Bill Maher is right. This is a good point. Now, if you get into this in the political sphere, the other side will say, well, Obama undermined those. And so Obama had all of these executive orders. And so that then justifies Trump coming into office having all of these executive orders. And, you know, this gets into then in terms of U.S. politics, the increasing power of the presidency because Congress continues to abdicate leadership and responsibility, and Congress is not independent enough of the political food fight, you know, so to take action against the president, whether that be Obama or individual Congress people don't have the ability to take action or speak out and criticize their own party. So all of these tensions make up a political process, and if a political process is functioning well, all of these tensions are kind of held in balance so that you can have productive conflict, and out of the conflicted process, good things will come. And the fear is that, well, now that the other side is in power, they're giving up the game. And this, in a sense, is, you know, to throw my Christian hat on again, this is part of the reason God is so handy in a process like this, because God is, in a sense, above the food fight. Now everyone's trying to bring God down, and Abraham Lincoln in his second inaugural, puts this out nicely, that, you know, is whose side is God on in the Civil War? Now what we have currently with a secular side is they'll say, you know, they won't just say God is on our side, they'll attack God and say God is a fiction, so on and so forth. But this is, you know, there's always something above if you're going to have a container that makes conflict productive and doesn't just simply lead to killing your enemies.
Things like threatening to put people in jail, threatening to put journalists in jail, wanting military parades, praising dictators.
Oh, okay, the threatening to put people in jail, threatening to jail political enemies is definitely something worth naming in this. Military parade, I find that distasteful. I find it contrary to our culture. I think it's actions that undermine our institution of keeping military power used outside of our borders and not within our borders. These are important parts of the fact that we haven't had, as you have in, say, Pakistan or Egypt or other countries in the world, where you have a military coup where the military takes over the government. And I know back in the Nixon days, when Alexander Haig pops up and says, "Don't worry, I'm in charge here," he wasn't speaking as a sitting general with troops at his back. Okay, so these are really important things, and so in the United States we're having some pretty substantive and foundational conversations now. Wherever you stand with respect to Trump or Obama, here's a good side of something that's happening now. We are having conversations again that hopefully a younger generation will listen to and learn from and say, these are the practices. Remember, first we have to act stuff out before we can articulate them and represent them. So we're going to act out the important things of our presidency. And one of the critical things of this country that has kept it stable and in peacetime has been presidents obey the law. When your term is done, you leave the White House. Things like this. And so, before Obama's term was done, I was reading speculation. Oh, Obama's not going to leave the White House. Obama's going to declare national law. Obama's going to, nope, he didn't. And whatever you felt about Obama, he didn't do it. Now, at some point, Trump will leave office. And the question will be, how will he leave office? Well, he's been showing us by his behavior who he is. You might like that behavior. You might find that behavior reprehensible. You might find that behavior counterproductive. But he will show us what he's made of. And these things are important.
Dictators wanting to be a dictator. I mean, we are at a moment here. This is, I try to...
And now wanting to be a dictator, okay, now we're crossing a line and we're expressing motivation. Now you might feel that your assumption here is justified. I think everybody probably wants to be a dictator in their heads, but the question is, what will they act out?
This on the people who are too young to remember a lot of presidents and a lot of elections, how incredibly different this is than anything that ever came before. I never much liked the other Republicans who were in office, but I have a renewed respect for them. George Bush and Mitt Romney would not have tried to pull this shit. They just wouldn't.
Okay, and now let's see if we remember this the next time we have a so-called regular Republican. I was listening to, and I'm thinking about doing a video with a conversation with Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, and there's my son. He's saying hi. He just came home. He's my youngest son, youngest of 5. Where was I? Oh, John McWhorter on a video. Ben came in and I forgot what I was going to say. Better go back to the video.
What about Nixon?
Nixon got caught, and he gave himself up, basically.
Well, although this president makes the Watergate burglars look brilliant.
Right.
And now, in all fairness, and I have my political opinions that I'm not, you suss them out, you can find them out. It's no great mystery what they are. But at some point we have to. At some point we have to speak with fairness, and whereas, I will enjoy political comedy to my taste as much as anyone. Calling the other side dumb publicly on a show like this does not help, because this gets back to Peterson's question. 40% of the country supported this man for whatever reasons they had. This is the game that we're playing when we're working with politics.
It seems to me that it's not.
Point we can be as tough as we're being on the president. I think we should, for all the reasons you just said, Bill, without telling his supporters that they're stupid, without saying basket of deplorables. If we want to bring them around to what I would say is a more enlightened kind of.
Good for Bruni. Good for Bruni. I'm glad Bruni stuck up here, stuck up for this, and I'm glad he said that. I think that shows maturity. He is acting out the kind of political maturity and adulthood we need in this country, and he's making the right sounds now.
Of thinking, and if we want them to see Donald Trump as someone who's turned the presidency into one long infomercial for Mar-a-Lago, we can.
And now those on the right will hear the condescension. And in a speech like this, he's being very careful, because when he is speaking a certain way, people his allies on the left are going to start getting nervous. Are you betraying our side? And so then he balances it with a little bit of condescension, which settles down his base. Say, okay, Frank's still one of us. He's just playing this game. And again, this is how the game is played.
Can do that without saying to them, you've been duped, you're chumps, you're dumb, you're deplorable. And I think we need to talk to them with more generosity than we do.
And I was glad to hear Frank Bruni say that. Now Alex Wagner's going to jump in.
I'm confused about how this dovetails with your thesis.
Now again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, if you get a chance to watch the show, Wagner took on Peterson like nobody else here. The governor of Washington sat there, and Frank Bruni sat there. Now it's important when you look at a question like this. I mean, who's going to take him on? One of the things you always have to ask is who has the most to lose. Each of the people there has their own little cloud of witnesses in there. They've all got their watchers in there, and they're all, quietly, having their little cabinet meeting in terms of how we should act. Of the three, of Frank Bruni and then the governor of Washington, she's probably got the least to lose. Plus, she's a woman, so she can address him. I mean, there's just so many layers in here in terms of what's happening. So she's now going to come at Peterson with a really strong question, and I think actually a very good question.
That the left is too preoccupied with being non-confrontational. Right?
The left is too
well,
preoccupied
just that
with
we
being,
are.
that is
That's
definitely
interesting.
not
Okay,
right.
no, all right.
No, that's
I'm
a good
paraphrasing,
question.
But the idea that
And now pay attention here. I mean, you've got to appreciate you got to appreciate this whole scene, not from watching here like we are, but from Peterson's point of view. He's traveled to Los Angeles. This is a major thing for Peterson. This is another major piece of him visibility in terms of his overall agenda. And this is Bill Maher's show. Bill Maher has been saying nice things to him. Bill Maher seems to be at some level a fan, but again, with a show host like this, you don't really have any way to gauge that. Again, with a bunch of high status people, these people are not like some of us sitting around watching hours of YouTube a day because we're low status people, and so on and so forth. So understanding exactly where this woman is coming from is tricky, and I should add, having a conversation, having a productive conversation between people that don't know each other very well is not an easy thing to do. And so, first she throws the question out. Peterson doesn't quite understand it. Maher steps in and says, no, that's a really good question. He probably is better attuned to her and understand the point she's making. And the point she's making is a very good one, because on one hand, you're complaining about the speech of someone else, and you're at the same time saying free speech is important. That's one of the layers to this. There are actually a number of layers to this question.
That liberals, especially intellectuals, are preoccupied with politically correct speech. That they're not.
I see. What,
and yet.
No, they're too preoccupied with identity politics by a large margin. And
this is the first mention of identity politics on the show. And so now they're starting to have a conversation, which is good.
They tend to categorize.
And you can see it on her. She wants to jump back into the fray.
Everyone by their ethnicity and their sex and their gender, and I think all that does is turn people into tribal actors, and that the end result of that is catastrophe.
But weren't you also saying, though, that the left is too worried about offending people?
I think that goes.
And okay, so now that's an excellent question, because okay, so where do the identity politics and so if you're telling someone you're playing identity politics, you should stop, and that playing identity politics will in fact lead to the kinds of extremely destructive behaviors that we saw in Nazi Germany or in the Soviet bloc in the 20th century. Where does speech lie? Now to me, again, this gets into my Christian background, because in a sense what God does, and what a belief in God's sovereignty and a belief in providence does, is sandbox the conversation. Because one of the difficulties of having a purely secular conversation in this is that the only adults in charge are human beings. And now you might say, well, that's a con to imagine that there is a divine adult in charge who is going to keep things within bounds. I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that criticism. Because yeah, we came disastrously close to nuking each other in the Cold War, and came to that precipice a number of times, whether or not we knew it. During the Cuban Missile Crisis was one moment. There were some other moments in the 80s. These are really big issues. And so you could say, no, where was God? Well, you might say, well, we didn't nuke each other. World War II did end. Germany didn't win. The Cold War did end without a nuclear war. Russia didn't win. The communists didn't win. And so now you might say, well, that's a biology one, or the what's been encoded with us, the kinds of things that Jordan Peterson has been working on. This has been encoded into us. So in a sense, our survival instincts won and won out over these others. And to this we can attribute some of the blessings that we've seen in liberal democracies, so on and so forth. But the same goes if in fact you say, well, there is a God, and this God is an author of history. And I'm probably going to have to pay more attention and quote Miroslav Volf's comments, because Volf, who was teaching at least at Yale Divinity School for a while, came out of the destruction of the former Yugoslavia, noted that secular people have a need to correct all injustices within this time frame, and religious people have a belief that there is a God who will in fact do justice, and all injustices will be addressed outside of this age. And this is why you have Judgment Day at the end of history. And now, obviously, if you say, well, I don't believe that a God is ever going to bring justice out of the human story, well, then you will be tempted to take justice into your own hands. And if there's something we know about human beings, we're not really good at it. And you say, well, yeah, but me and my tribe, we would be better at it. And all the other tribes say, no, because I don't trust you. And that's where we are in this human food fight.
I will.
Yes,
Wait,
yes. Well, that goes with...
But then on the other hand, when the left, for example, offends people in the political sphere, you're questioning whether that's somehow bad for society writ large.
Well, I'm concerned about... I think that those two issues are...
So in other words, if Jordan Peterson is annoyed at the left for being offensive, how does he justify being offensive himself? Because as Maher points out here, Peterson has the talent and the propensity to annoy a lot of people. And as if you go earlier in the show when he was talking to Bill Maher, he made the point that you're probably not going to do anything substantive if you don't offend people, at least to a degree. And in order to be productive, you are going to have to be offensive to one degree or another. And the trick is to be offensive in the right way, to the right degree, to keep the game going. And again, if you've listened to a lot of Peterson stuff, you'll understand this game talk. Your goal is to be invited to play again and again and again. And so far, if we're trying to figure out Jordan Peterson's climb up the hierarchy, he keeps being invited to new tables to play the game. And I'm not surprised if Bill Maher is, to the degree that Bill Maher is watching Jordan Peterson, that Bill Maher is interested in Peterson. I'm not surprised, given all the years I've been watching Maher, and Bill Maher is not afraid of offending people. And Bill Maher offends people on a regular basis, and sometimes he has to apologize for it. But he's still on HBO, and he's been on TV, and he's anti-religious, and the thing I like about Bill Maher is he's not afraid to criticize both sides, and sometimes he does so in a slightly immature fashion, in my opinion, but he does it as an adult. And when he does it, he takes responsibility for it, and he plays the game, which is why Maher continues to be invited back to play the game. And this is exactly what we see happening with Peterson. So now he's going to have to introduce something which has become anathema in our 24-hour cable news cycle, social media, political environment, which is nuance.
I think that those two issues are somewhat separate. I'm concerned about the dialogue in the United States around the presidency pulling people farther and farther apart. It has nothing to do with the behavior of Trump. I think this is an independent issue. You can say positive or negative
But
things
he's
about
only
Trump
there
as he
because they
might.
support him. You see,
I know.
mean, that's the thing. It's
but
not,
that's the issue. That's the issue. Is they did support him, and
without
so,
the circus, he's just a lonely clown.
yeah.
But he has these people in Congress who are enablers, and this base that it is a cult of personality, not unlike dictatorships we've seen in the past.
Now, in all fairness, many presidents have cults of personality. Was Obama a cult of personality? I voted for Obama twice, so hate me if you want to. There's a dear lovely woman in my church who has Obama on her Bible cover. Obama, as a black man being elected president, meant a lot in the black community. And I think those of you who hate Obama, I think most of you can understand that. If someone from a tribe that you identify with is elected, wherever they stand with respect to your politics. Now, in the Christian Reformed Church, if someone from the Christian Reformed Church was elected president of the United States from either party, both sides would feel a sense of pride. That's how hierarchies work and some of the complexities of hierarchies. So,
I mean, he said once, famously, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any fans.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes.
And he has proved that to be almost true. I mean, we cannot imagine what he would do where they would turn on him, because I don't know what that would be. I don't think it's anything.
And I think also here, in terms of this polarization justification, there's always the sense that you exaggerate the power of your rival in order to make your point. And I think Maher is exaggerating here. Trump is pretty popular with a certain number of people. His popularity ratings, his favorability ratings generally don't go above 40%. It's a segment of the country, but again, this is pretty normal, because what happens if you push people towards certain kinds of tribalism, they will act in a certain way. And once we get our egos involved, once we get going, we will dig in. And Peterson's trying to nuance this and look at the body language. Peterson's listening. He's being the good therapist. He's also a little nervous. He's playing with his he's playing with his wedding ring, which is something he often does when he's nervous, and you'll often see him do finger things when he's nervous. But I hate to be bombarded here and look at all the body language. But personas are on full effect here. People are paying a lot of attention and working hard at this.
Because whatever it was, he would just say, well, it's fake news.
But okay, so imagine he's impeached, just for the sake of argument.
Impeached or convicted.
Okay, either of those. But
both.
It seems to me
that matters.
Because he's only out if they're both happen, not just one or the other. It doesn't happen one or the other. It's a sequence. Just a little political note for our Canadian viewers.
To leave.
Yeah, no, it's not an unimportant detail, but it still seems to me that it leaves you with the problem of what do you do with the disaffected 40% that are going to be very unhappy about this, independent of Trump's behavior.
Right, and that is the question. What are you going to do? And this is always the question. Again, I finished reading How to Think by Alan Jacobs, which was a wonderful book, and I highly recommend it. What are you going to do with the repugnant other, the rival, the enemy, the person that the outgroup, the people whose views are in your mind reprehensible? Are you going to kill them? Are you going to put them in concentration camps? Are you going to try to silence them? And if you don't do these things, go back to the sermon that I'm working on for this week, you're going to have to increase your capacity for suffering. And if we go all the way back to the earlier conversation that Peterson had with Bill Maher in this show, where he's talking about safe spaces and universities and all of the stuff that has been pretty up on this entire conversation, if you're going to behave well in political or religious or any situation of interpersonal conflict, you have to increase your capacity to endure suffering. And actually, this is exactly where religion comes into play. Because if the religion offers a variety of means to increase your capacity to suffer on behalf of some other good that you want, and this is part of the reason that religious people are so successful in the world so often as compared to some non-religious people, because what religions actually train you to do throughout your life is to endure suffering for a greater goal. And whether you want to compete in the Olympics, or whether you want to be successful in marriage, or whether you want to be successful in school, a lot of this is training in terms of how to suffer. Can I suffer today for a good tomorrow? And this gets into Jordan Peterson's talk about sacrifice. So this is all very germane into all the stuff that Jordan Peterson has been talking about.
Kind of like the Sunnis after we kicked over Saddam.
Well, that's a hell of a...
And often the little statements that get stepped on are important. And Bill Maher here says, well, remember when we kicked over Saddam, the Sunnis rose up. And Peterson says that's a hell of an example, because that is a great example. What do you in the United States want to fight a war over Donald Trump? And both sides have to ask that question. Do you want to fight a civil war? Remember what the last civil war was like, and that had a fairly homogeneous border. You know, you look at an American Civil War. You got the two coasts against the middle. Not a good thing. And yeah,
ISIS.
To cite.
Yes,
right.
That's what I worry about.
Let me
Trump
suggest
support.
that this is an argument, looking for an argument rather than a solution. We're not waiting for impeachment. We're making sure that people understand Donald Trump cannot stop us today.
Now, this speech by the governor is very interesting, because a lot depends on what he means by us. Because if he is saying the President of the United States cannot overstep his bounds and violate the very significant institutions that were created by the constitutions that have developed over the history of the United States that keeps the president within bounds, that's an important conversation. But now listen to him talk, because us will very quickly become the agenda for his tribe. And once the language slips in that direction, well, now we're back into the tribal game. Now you're saying back what was said earlier in the program, you know, history is on our side. This is our long arc of justice, and Donald Trump can't stop us. And now I remember after his election, someone wrote what he's telling his daughters that, oh, Donald Trump might win now, but he'll be the last of them, because all this long arc of history, inevitability, this is religious language. This is eschatology. And this gets into the point that I've been making throughout my points, that what we're really seeing in the United States is a civil war within Christendom. This is a civil war within the broad Christian conversation of the West. And the American left has now adopted their own religion. Now, it's a secularized religion. They don't necessarily have a God, but it's got all the elements of religion, including eschatology. And now listen to this governor start talking more like a preacher and using what is fundamentally eschatological language.
Donald Trump could not stop me from the first net neutrality bill to make sure people have access to the internet.
Okay, so now the Democrats are playing the states' rights card.
He could not stop us from doing that.
Now who's us?
He cannot stop us. He cannot stop us.
And he's got the crowd behind him. So now he's coming into preacher mode. Now remember, politicians they're somewhere on the line in terms of wonkish or people leaders. So they've got their own preacher modes.
From acting on climate change with all this bloviating saying it's just a...
And he's putting his little digs there.
He can't stop us from fighting climate change. He can't stop us from having the best paid family leave and sick leave policy. He can't stop us. When we demonstrate...
And now Bill Maher, the anti-religionist, is going to jump in and say, let's dial back some of your religious rhetoric.
Progress in our states.
Washington State.
No, but
She says you can't stop us from promoting Washington State. So then she, interesting deflection here. She kind of derails, which he has to agree on, that, okay, you slipped into preacher mode, and she kind of highlights, okay, now you've put on a persona, and now you're, which mask are you wearing, Governor? Are you the promoter of the great state of Washington, or are you a preacher of the church of the left, the blue church?
Good point.
No one
That's
can
an
stop
absurd-
us
He
from boosting
He certainly is
Washington.
stopping us from protecting the environment. He has signed executive orders, right? The first thing he did in office was to sign an order.
And Bill Maher is an honest guy. He's a smart guy, and he pays attention, and he listens to conversations. And I think this part of the reason Bill Maher has endured, even despite some of his significant stumbles over the past and getting into trouble for some of his jokes. I think if you're a comedian and if you're not getting into trouble for some of your jokes, you're probably not being a good comedian.
That said, hey, you want to dump your coal sludge in the streams? Go right ahead. The head of the EPA is Scott Pruitt. He's reversed all of
No, he just changed it to the Environmental Pollutants Association.
I know, but
Okay, now we're going to do some more digs.
to say he can't stop us.
And he's changed the tax landscape everywhere.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't do anything in your state.
And he's
to do away
appointing,
with, yeah.
he's appointing crazy judges left and
Yes.
right.
So here's the
he's
good news.
changing things as we speak.
And of course, you know, for there was a significant meeting at Wheaton College about evangelicals that I've been debating whether or not to talk about, because the conversation about evangelicals in politics is so complicated in terms of how to identify people, how to number people, where race comes into this conversation, how politics intersects. That's a huge thing. Judges are, for many conservatives, one of the real issues, and it's an issue on both sides, and part of this is natural because, of course, judiciary is supposed to be impartial. In Christianity, you have prophet, priest, and king. Well, is the executive the king? Well, kind of, but in some ways the judiciary is the king, because the judiciary is supposed to be above politics, and this whole James Comey thing is supposed to be about above politics. And so I'm getting more into politics in this video than I usually like to get into any video, but you cannot escape politics and live in this world. And I made a video a little bit earlier in the week about, you know, whether your preacher should tell you how to vote. So, you know, I'm not going to avoid politics. I think we have to talk about politics. I think how we talk about politics is important.
We don't cover it because of Stormy Daniels, but all of this is going on.
And Peterson was nodding. You could see him there.
What can I say? He's okay.
Get used to it.
Okay. All right. We didn't get to any questions, but it was a wonderful panel. Thank you, everybody. Happy Thursday.
And overall, very interesting overtime with Bill Maher. Go through his YouTube channel. You can probably catch the other Peterson bits in it. But I think it was a good outing for Peterson, and we'll see what comes of it.